Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are again going to learn two more important rules for writing clean and efficient Python code. So the first rule is going to be the rule about import statements. So whenever you actually want to import certain modules from certain packages, you always need to remember these rules. So there are actually two important rules. The first one is quite simple, and the rule suggests that you always need to write your import statements at the top of the file. Now, we always follow these rules most of the times, but in some cases, the import statements might be included in between some of the code, and that's actually not a good practice to import any code. So let's say if you want to import certain package, you always need to import it at the top of your code. And the logical reason behind importing things at the top of your file is because when other person or when your coworker actually refers your code, he will be able to understand which particular modules or which particular packages or which particular libraries you have used in your code. But for some reason, if you import those packages or modules or libraries in between your code, then it becomes absolutely impossible for a person, or it becomes absolutely difficult for a person to determine which particular libraries, modules or packages you have used. So that's the logical explanation for why you should always include imports on the top of your code. And let's also discuss one more important thing about importing a module from a package. So let's say you have a Python package, and as you all know, the package actually contains a particular module. Let's say you have a module and a package. So I am simply going to take an example over here. This is going to be a hypothetical scenario. So let's say the package name is in this case X, and let's say the module name is Y. So what you essentially do is that while performing an import on this, you actually import module Y from the package X. But what a lot of people actually do is that they directly import the module Y. So simply they type in import Y, and this is actually not a proper way to do so. So in this case, what you have to do is that instead of directly importing this thing, you have to explain that you actually import this particular module from a particular package. So first you need to type from, then you have to define the package name, which is in this case X, and then you have to define import Y. And the logical reason behind this thing is that what happens sometimes is that when you import a particular module, there are certain packages which have the same module name. So your interpreter in that case is going to get confused that from which particular package it has to import the certain Y module, because a lot of packages might contain the same module, and that is going to be a cause of confusion. So always make sure that you always specify the package name, that is, you import certain module from a particular package name in your Python code. So this is one of the things which you need to remember. And now let's move on to the next rule, which is how you should test for a particular condition. So for this purpose, I am actually going to take an example. So let's say if you have to see if a particular name value is entered into the name variable. So let's take an example. Let's say name is going to be equal to John. And what you could do here is that you could figure out, and I guess we have left two spaces over here. And in order to check if this thing actually has some content in it, so let's assume that we don't know if some kind of value is stored in the name variable. So one way to check it is by checking the length of that particular variable. So you could type len name, and you could type this equal to 0. And if the length is found equal to 0, then what you could do is that you could print out the value, like let's say no name found. And actually, if you have a look over here, it says redundant parentheses found. So this is also not a good practice to have redundant parentheses. And also you have to specify white spaces around the operator. So here, if you run this code now, as you could see, we are going to get a correct result because this actually contains a name, and henceforth this statement is not executed. And if you remove this name from here, and if you again run this code, it will actually say that no name found. So syntactically this code looks correct, but what's wrong in this particular code is that you have unnecessarily used this double equal to 0 sign. So in this condition, what we are doing is that we are checking if the length of this name variable is equal to 0, and if this is equal to 0, then we are actually going to execute this statement. But this line of code is unnecessary here because the if statement actually checks if the result of this statement is having a value 0 or 1. So that means if the if statement's value is 0, that means the if statement turns out to be false and this code is not going to be executed. And if the if statement actually is positive, that is if it matches the condition, then the result of this if statement is a non-zero or 1. So one way to actually modify this code is that you could simply go ahead and remove the 0, and what you could do is that you could also add in an if statement over here. So what this thing actually does is that the if statement is by default going to have two results, that is 0 or 1. So if this condition turns out to be true, or if the result of this condition is 0, that means the condition is false. So now if you actually go ahead and calculate the value for the length of the name, it's actually going to be 0. So if you save this code and run it, as you could see, it actually executed this line of code. But what we essentially want to do here is that if the length of this thing is 0, that means we want to make sure that we want to print this particular statement, which is no name found. So what we could do here is that we could change this thing to name found, and we could write a else block here to print out no name found. So we will type in no name found. So by doing this, what we have done here is that we have eliminated the use of writing a double equal to sign over here. So now if you run this code, as you could see, this thing says no name found, and if you actually specify some name like John over here, save the code, and if you run this thing, as you could see, it says name found. So always make sure that you never do certain kind of thing wherein you compare a result of the if statement with 0 or 1, because by default the if is actually doing the same job for you, so you don't want to unnecessarily add one extra line of code over there. So those were some rules about the import statement and the if statement. So hopefully you guys were able to understand what I have tried to explain over here. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.